Imagine this. At this very moment, while you're listening to these words, somewhere deep in the misty highlands of West Java, Indonesia, a secret is stirring, a pyramid. Not the sandstone monuments of Egypt that we've all seen in photographs, but something far older, something that predates the Sphinx, the Great Pyramid of Giza, even the earliest known civilizations by an unfathomable margin, a structure that was already ancient when the last ice age held the world in its frozen grip. We're talking about a pyramid that might be 28,000 years old. 28,000 years. Let that number settle in your mind for a moment. When this structure was allegedly built, humans were supposedly living in caves, chipping stone tools, painting on walls by firelight. According to everything we've been taught, our ancestors were primitive hunter-gatherers, concerned only with survival. They didn't build monuments, and they certainly didn't engineer pyramids. And yet there it stands. Or rather, there it hides. Gunung Padang, they call it. The mountain of enlightenment, a hill that's not quite a hill. A natural formation that's perhaps not so natural after all. But here's where the story transforms from fascinating to deeply unsettling. Why, after explosive discoveries that made international headlines, was the groundbreaking research suddenly silenced? Why were excavations frozen mid-dig? Why was a peer-reviewed scientific paper abruptly retracted, despite presenting evidence that could revolutionize our understanding of human history? The official explanation is methodological errors and misinterpreted data. Overzealous researchers making extraordinary claims without extraordinary evidence. The journal editors said the radiocarbon dates couldn't be definitively linked to human activity. Critics dismissed the findings as wishful thinking, pseudoscience dressed up in academic credentials. But if you listen carefully, if you dig beneath the surface of official statements and academic dismissals, you'll hear other whispers. Whispers of institutional gatekeeping, of discoveries too dangerous to acknowledge because they threaten not just theories, but power structures built upon those theories. Investigative journalist Graham Hancock, whose Netflix series Ancient Apocalypse brought the site to global attention in 2022, connects it to a worldwide pattern of anomalies, from the submerged ruins of Yonaguni in Japan, with their sharp-angled steps and enigmatic carvings, to Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, where 11,000-year-old pillars display advanced symbolic reliefs, and even to the Great Sphinx, whose weathered surface, he argues, may predate Egypt's earliest pharaohs. Hancock theorizes that a mother civilization flourished more than 12,000 years ago, only to be destroyed by comet impacts or massive meltwater floods as glaciers collapsed, inundating lowlands such as Sunderland, the now submerged continent that once linked Indonesia to mainland Asia. The survivors, he suggests, scattered across the world, preserving fragments of their lost knowledge in myths remembered as Atlantis in Plato's dialogues, and Mu, the Pacific land of enlightened beings chronicled by 19th century explorers like James Churchward. Consider the implications. If humans built sophisticated structures during the Ice Age, then everything changes. The story we tell ourselves about linear progress, about civilization emerging from Mesopotamia and Egypt, about Western culture as the pinnacle of human achievement, all of it crumbles, the timeline fractures, history becomes cyclical rather than linear. And perhaps most unsettling of all, we're forced to ask, what else have we forgotten? What other chapters of human brilliance have been erased by time, by cataclysm, or by those who prefer we remain ignorant of our true potential? The establishment doesn't want you thinking these thoughts. It's far more convenient if Gunung Padang remains an interesting geological formation with some later megalithic additions. Far safer if we keep believing that civilization is a recent invention, a mere 5,000 or 6,000 years old. Because if we accept that humans built pyramids 28,000 years ago, we must also accept that we've been lied to, perhaps not maliciously, but lied to nonetheless, about our own past. And here's what makes this story so compelling in 2025. It's not over. The Indonesian government, after years of silence, has announced plans to resume investigations. Fresh excavations are planned. New technologies will be deployed. The debate is reigniting, fiercer than ever. Social media is ablaze with speculation. Ancient mystery enthusiasts and armchair archaeologists are analyzing every scrap of data. The academic establishment is preparing its defenses. We stand at a threshold. On one side, the comfortable narrative we've always known. On the other, a truth so strange, so magnificent, that it transforms our understanding of what it means to be human. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we can judge the evidence, before we can weigh the conspiracies against the facts, we need to journey to the place itself. We need to understand the mountain, the legends that surround it, and the people who've dedicated their lives to uncovering its secrets. So settle in, dear listener. Make yourself comfortable. This is the story of Gunung Padang, the story of a pyramid that might rewrite everything. Tonight, we unravel one of the most controversial archaeological discoveries of our time, a discovery that might just reveal that our ancestors were far more advanced than we ever imagined. In the mist-shrouded hills of West Java, Indonesia, a formation rises from the earth, Gunung Padang, a green, pyramid-shaped mountain that seems carved by nature itself. The name translates to Mountain of Enlightenment or Field of Light, depending on which local elder you ask, but both translations hint at something beyond the physical, something transcendent. This isn't just a hill. For the Sundanese people who've lived in its shadow for generations, Gunung Padang is a place of power, a portal between the mundane world and something far more mysterious. The first European to take serious notice of Gunung Padang was a Dutch archaeologist named Nicolaas Johannes Krom. The year was 1914, during the height of Dutch colonial control over the East Indies. Krom had heard rumours circulating among plantation owners and local administrators, whispers of strange stone formations hidden atop a remote hill near Cianjur. Intrigued, Krom organised an expedition. Picture him hacking through dense jungle, the humidity oppressive, insects swarming, local guides leading the way up increasingly steep terrain. And then, breaking through the vegetation, he encountered something that stopped him in his tracks. Terraces of enormous stones arranged in deliberate patterns, columns of basalt, some weighing hundreds of kilograms, set in place with unmistakable intent. These were no natural formations, they were structures shaped and raised by human hands. Krom documented what he saw, writing it up for the official reports of the Dutch Archaeological Service. He described a megalithic complex, possibly a prehistoric sanctuary. He noted the local reverence for the site and he recommended further investigation. But here's where the story takes its first suspicious turn. Krom's recommendation was ignored. The Dutch authorities showed no interest in mounting a proper excavation. His report was filed away, buried in the archives of colonial administration. For decades, nothing happened. The jungle reclaimed the terraces. The stones disappeared beneath vines and moss. Why? The conspiracy-minded point out that acknowledging a sophisticated Indonesian structure predating European monuments would have been inconvenient for the colonial narrative. The entire justification for European dominance rested on the premise that Asian and African societies were primitive, backwards, in need of Western guidance and exploitation. Evidence of advanced indigenous engineering would complicate that story significantly. And so the mountains slept. The locals continued their pilgrimages, maintained their traditions, but the wider world forgot. The site emerged from obscurity in 1979, not through academic channels but by simple accident. 3 farmers, Endi, Salam and Abedin, were working their fields on the slopes of Gunung Padang when they uncovered something unusual. Stone walls, carefully fitted blocks, arrangements that spoke of purpose and planning. They reported their discovery to local authorities, and this time something different happened. Indonesia had gained independence decades earlier. The nation was actively working to reclaim and celebrate its cultural heritage, to build an identity separate from colonial narratives. The government's Bureau of Archaeology dispatched teams to investigate. What they found exceeded expectations. Over 400 andesite columns, some massive, arranged across 5 distinct terraces, a structure spanning thousands of square meters. Initial dating suggested construction around 2500 to 1500 BCE. Impressive certainly, but fitting comfortably within accepted timelines for megalithic construction in Southeast Asia. The site was officially recognized, protected, and then largely forgotten again. It became a minor tourist attraction, an interesting footnote in Indonesian archaeology. Local guides would bring visitors up the 370 stone steps, pointing out the columns and retelling the legends of King Siliwangi. But to the international archaeological community, Gunung Padang remained obscure, just another megalithic site in a region full of them. Until 2011, when a geologist named Danny Hillman Natawijaja decided to take a closer look. Not because he was seeking ancient pyramids or lost civilizations, simply because something about the site's structure intrigued him from a geological perspective. He wanted to understand how it formed, whether it was entirely natural or showed signs of human modification. What he discovered would change everything, or try to, at least. Because what Hillman found buried beneath those visible terraces suggested that Gunung Padang wasn't thousands of years old, it was tens of thousands of years old. The stones weren't just arranged on the surface. They continued down, layer upon layer, construction phase after construction phase, buried deliberately, preserved intentionally, waiting for someone with the right tools and the right questions to find them. Stand at the base of Gunung Padang and look up. What you see is impressive enough. 5 distinct terraces rising like giant steps toward the summit, connected by a massive stone stairway of 370 steps carved into the hillside. Each terrace is dotted with columns of volcanic rock, andesite and basalt, materials forged in ancient eruptions, now standing in formations that seem almost too regular, too purposeful to be accidental. The site sprawls across approximately 150,000 square meters. To put that in perspective, that's roughly the size of 30 American football fields. And this isn't a small monument, this is a massive undertaking, regardless of when it was built. But what you see on the surface is merely the tip of an iceberg, or, more accurately, the visible portion of a pyramid that extends deep into the earth. When Dr. Hillman's team began their systematic survey in 2011, they brought technology that earlier investigators could only dream of. Ground-penetrating radar sends electromagnetic pulses into the earth and measures the reflections, creating a kind of underground map based on density differences. Electrical resistivity tomography works on a similar principle, injecting electrical currents and measuring resistance to identify voids, different materials, and structural boundaries. Seismic tomography uses controlled vibrations to chart the speed of waves through subsurface layers, revealing hidden chambers and construction patterns. These tools don't lie. They can't be influenced by expectation or desire. They simply report physical reality. What's dense, what's hollow, what's natural rock, and what shows signs of human modification. And what they revealed at Gunung Padang was extraordinary. The visible terraces, the structures that tourists photograph and archaeologists had previously studied, represent only the most recent construction phase. Hillman's team designated this as Unit 1. Based on weathering patterns, erosion analysis, and association with pottery fragments found on the surface, these structures date to somewhere between 2,500 and 3,500 years ago. Not incredibly ancient by archaeological standards, but certainly impressive. But the radar showed something beneath Unit 1. A second layer of construction, more compact, more deliberately arranged. This became Unit 2. Core samples were drilled, narrow cylinders of earth extracted from specific depths, allowing researchers to analyze soil composition, look for organic material suitable for radiocarbon dating, and examine the arrangement of stones below the surface. The samples from Unit 2 revealed something fascinating. Rocks arranged in patterns bonded with a matrix that wasn't quite natural, and organic material trapped in the soil, plant matter, charcoal that could be dated. The results from Unit 2 came back consistently in the range of 7,500 to 8,300 years ago. Now we were talking about something genuinely ancient. This pushed Gunung Padang's construction back to a time when, according to mainstream archaeology, most human societies were still in the process of inventing agriculture. The idea that such people could organize the labor and engineering expertise to build something on this scale challenged comfortable assumptions. But the real shock, the discovery that would ultimately make international headlines and spark fierce controversy, came from even deeper. At depths of 15 meters and beyond, the instruments detected something that shouldn't be there. Dense layers of material showing clear signs of fracturing and arrangement. Not the random jumble of natural geological formation, but structured, intentional placement. And most intriguingly, rectangular voids, open spaces, chambers or tunnels, their shapes too regular to be natural fissures or lava tubes. Core samples from this depth, designated Unit 3, yielded organic material that, when dated, returned results that made researchers' eyes widen, dates clustering around 16,000 years ago on the conservative end, and on the extreme end, dates reaching back 25,000 to 28,000 years before present. If these dates are accurate, if they truly reflect human activity rather than some natural process, then people were modifying and building on Gunung Padang during the last glacial maximum, during the coldest period of the last ice age, when ice sheets covered much of Europe and North America, when sea levels were 400 feet lower than today, exposing vast continental shelves now drowned beneath the oceans, when humans were nomadic hunters focused on simple survival. That's the timeline we're grappling with. And it's precisely why the controversy erupted with such ferocity. Hillman's team didn't stop with the radiocarbon dates. They used multiple dating methods to cross-verify their results. Optically stimulated luminescence, or OSL, measures when mineral grains were last exposed to sunlight, providing an independent check on burial dates. The OSL results corroborated the radiocarbon findings. Different methods, different materials, same time period. The geophysical scans revealed something else intriguing. The chambers aren't small. One cavity detected at a depth of 12 meters appears to measure roughly 10 by 15 meters, about the size of a large living room. Its outline in the radar imagery is remarkably regular. Too regular, Hillman argued, to be a natural geological feature like a lava tube or erosion pocket. What could these chambers contain? That's the question that keeps enthusiasts awake at night. Are they empty voids, or might they hold artifacts sealed away for millennia? Could there be skeletal remains of the builders, preserved in the relatively stable environment of deep burial? Or, and this is where speculation becomes wild but intoxicating, might there be something more? Carved stones bearing writing or symbols, metallic objects that would prove advanced metallurgy far earlier than currently accepted, star charts or astronomical records? The site's structure suggests something else remarkable. This wasn't built all at once. The distinct layers, Unit 1, Unit 2, Unit 3, possibly a Unit 4 even deeper, represent different construction phases separated by thousands of years. It's as if successive generations found this place, recognized its significance, and added their own contributions. Each era building upon the last, honoring something ancient, maintaining continuity with a past they perhaps didn't fully understand but knew was important. Think about what that implies. It means this site was recognized as special for thousands of years. It means knowledge of its location and significance persisted through climatic upheavals, through the drowning of coastlines, through the transformation of the entire regional environment. Oral traditions maintained its importance through periods of time that dwarf recorded human history. The composition of the deeper layers adds another dimension to the mystery. Analysis of material from Unit 3 revealed something Hillman's team hadn't expected: a cement-like compound binding some of the stones together. Not crude mud or clay, but a sophisticated mixture of silica, iron oxides and clay that formed a remarkably durable matrix. Let that sink in. Cement. Not quite like modern Portland cement, but serving a similar function, binding materials together into a stronger whole. And this compound appears in layers dated to more than 20,000 years ago, predating known human metallurgy by millennia. Geochemical analysis showed that this wasn't accidental. The ratios of ingredients were too consistent, too purposeful. Someone, somehow, had figured out that mixing these particular materials in these particular proportions created a binding agent stronger than any of its individual components. They discovered geopolymer technology, creating artificial stone through chemical processes, long before we have any record of humans developing such knowledge. The structure of Gunung Padang also shows signs of sophisticated planning. The terraces aren't randomly oriented. Preliminary surveys suggest alignments with solstices and equinoxes, though more research is needed to confirm this definitively. If the alignments are intentional, they indicate astronomical knowledge, tracking the sun's movement, marking seasonal changes, perhaps even monitoring stellar positions. The main stairway, those 370 steps ascending the structure, is itself an engineering achievement. It's not a rough path carved into the hillside, but a carefully constructed processional route with retaining walls on either side. The width and regular spacing of steps suggests this was meant for group movement, ceremonies perhaps where multiple people would climb together in formation. Local guides today report that climbing the stairs produces an unusual sensation. Some describe it as meditative, a rhythmic process that alters consciousness. Others mention a subtle vibration felt through the soles of the feet, as if the entire structure is humming at a frequency just below hearing. Psychological suggestion? Or are they actually sensing those acoustic properties researchers measured? The deeper you dig, literally and figuratively, the stranger Gunung Padang becomes. It's not fitting neatly into any category, not a simple megalithic structure like Stonehenge, not a pyramid in the Egyptian or Mesoamerican sense, something else entirely, something that doesn't quite match any known archaeological template, and that's precisely why it's so controversial. Science advances by categorizing, by finding patterns, by fitting new discoveries into existing frameworks. Gunung Padang resists categorization. It occupies a space that shouldn't exist in our current understanding of human prehistory. To fully understand its significance and the resistance to accepting that significance, we need to zoom out. we need to see it in the context of other anomalous sites around the world. Sites that, taken together, suggest something remarkable, that the standard story of human civilization emerging gradually from primitive origins might be incomplete. What if there was something before? What if advanced societies rose and fell long before our recorded history begins? What if Gunung Padang is just one piece of a much larger, much stranger puzzle? Let's follow that thread. Let's explore the global web of mysteries that Gunung Padang connects to, because once you start seeing the pattern, it's hard to unsee it. Turning back time 12,000 years to the end of the last ice age. Watch as sea levels rise 400 feet, drowning vast coastal plains. Sundaland, the exposed continental shelf connecting Indonesia, Malaysia, and mainland Southeast Asia, disappears beneath the waves. The same happens worldwide. Land bridges vanish, coastlines retreat inland. Hundreds of thousands of square miles of habitable land, where humans likely lived in their highest concentrations, sink beneath the ocean. If advanced civilizations existed in that era, their cities, their monuments, their evidence is now underwater. What remains are only the highest points, the mountaintop refuges like Gunung Padang, and scattered underwater anomalies that occasionally catch divers' attention. This perspective transforms how we look at controversial sites. They're not isolated curiosities, they're survivors, peaks of a drowned landscape. And when you view them together, patterns emerge. Let's start with one of the most visually dramatic, the Yonaguni Monument, off the coast of Japan's southernmost island. In 1986, a local dive operator named Kihachiro Aratake was exploring waters off Yonaguni looking for hammerhead sharks. What he found was something far stranger: massive underwater structures resembling a stepped pyramid, flat terraces, right-angle corners, what appeared to be carved staircases and pathways, all submerged about 25 meters beneath the surface. The structure is enormous. The main formation measures roughly 150 by 40 meters and rises about 25 meters from the seafloor. To put that in perspective, it's approximately the height of an 8-story building. And it's not alone. Multiple formations in the area show similar characteristics. The formations are sandstone, sedimentary rock that can fracture along regular planes. Skeptics, including some geologists, argue that what looks like artificial construction is actually natural jointing, the tendency of certain rock types to crack in geometric patterns. They point to other examples of natural rock formations that mimic human construction, like the Giant's Causeway in Ireland. But proponents, led by marine geologist Masaki Kimura, who has studied the site extensively, argue that nature alone can't explain all the features. There are too many right angles, too many features that look functional, holes that appear to be anchor points, channels that look like drainage systems, flat areas that resemble plazas or platforms. Moreover, what appears to be a carved turtle and other animal motifs have been found on the structures. Natural erosion doesn't create representational art. If these carvings are genuine, they're proof of human agency. The debate over Yonaguni has raged for decades. It remains unresolved, with true believers pointing to features that must be artificial, and skeptics dismissing each piece of evidence as either natural formation or overly wishful interpretation. But here's what's undeniable. If Yonaguni is artificial, it's ancient. The structure has been underwater since sea levels rose at the end of the Ice Age. That means it would have to be at least 10,000 to 12,000 years old, possibly much older. And here's where it connects to Gunung Padang. Both are potentially Ice Age structures. Both show stepped, terraced designs. Both are made of volcanic rock. Both are located on opposite edges of what was once Sundaland. the exposed landmass connecting Indonesia to mainland Asia when sea levels were lower. Some researchers theorize a cultural connection, ancient peoples navigating land bridges and island chains across what's now the Indonesian archipelago and extending to the Ryukyu Islands where Yonaguni sits. A maritime civilization perhaps adapted to coastal living, building stone structures at strategic points. When the waters rose, most of their sites drowned. Gunung Padang survived because it was built high. Yonaguni is what we find in the lower elevations, the drowned evidence of the same culture. It's speculative, certainly, but the parallels are intriguing. Both sites show evidence of acoustic properties. Yonaguni's formations produce unusual resonances underwater, though this is harder to study than at Gunung Padang. Both have sparked intense controversy, with mainstream archaeology skeptical and alternative researchers excited. Now shift your perspective westward, across thousands of miles to southeastern Turkey, where the desert plain hides secrets even more paradigm-challenging. Göbekli Tepe. If you haven't heard of it, you should have. It's arguably the most important archaeological discovery of the past 50 years, and it's only about 5% excavated. The site consists of massive stone circles, think Stonehenge, but older and more elaborate. Enormous T-shaped pillars, some weighing up to 20 tons, arranged in rings and carved with intricate reliefs of animals, abstract symbols, and mysterious iconography. The kicker: it dates to approximately 9,600 BCE, 11,000 years ago, 6,000 years older than Stonehenge, 5,000 years before Sumer civilization. The site challenges every assumption about the Neolithic revolution that transitioned from hunting-gathering to farming that supposedly triggered the rise of civilization. Göbekli Tepe suggests the causation might run the other direction. Perhaps complex social organization and monumental construction came first, and agriculture developed to support the labor force needed to build such structures. Graham Hancock sees Göbekli Tepe, Gunung Padang, and other anomalous sites as evidence of a global civilization, or at least a diffusion of knowledge and techniques from a common source. A mother culture, perhaps centered in now submerged regions, that influence societies across vast distances. The carvings at Göbekli Tepe have been interpreted by some as recording astronomical phenomena, comet impacts, stellar events. Swarmbergers and Martin Sweatman, in their research published in Mediterranean Archaeology and Archaeometry, argued that some pillars depict constellations and mark the date of a catastrophic comet strike around 10,900 BCE that triggered the Younger Dryas cooling event. This would tie Göbekli Tepe directly to cataclysm theories. If the builders were recording or commemorating a cosmic disaster, they had sophisticated astronomical knowledge. And if that disaster was real, it might explain why advanced societies disappeared, leaving only fragments like Göbekli Tepe and Gunung Padang. A global civilization may indeed have existed before the Younger Dryas, a world reduced to dust, leaving behind only scattered traces in megalithic monuments that even nature itself could not destroy. In the 1920s, James Churchward, a British writer and mystic, claimed to have translated ancient tablets describing a vast continent that once existed in the Pacific, the cradle of a lost civilization called Mu. The continent stretches across 64 million square miles of what is now open ocean, larger than Asia, broader than Africa, dwarfing every landmass in the modern world. Its eastern edge brushes the coast of South America near present-day Peru. Its western boundary approaches the Philippines and the shores of Southeast Asia. To the north, it reaches toward the Aleutian Islands. To the south, it extends almost to Antarctica. This is no small island chain lost to rising seas. This is a world. Churchward's Mu contains not just land, but geography. Mountain ranges that dwarf the Himalayas, river systems that make the Amazon look like a creek, vast inland seas that reflect snow-capped peaks in their still waters, 7 great cities positioned according to astronomical alignments, each one larger than any metropolis of the ancient world, each one specialized for different aspects of the civilization that once made this continent the beating heart of human culture. In the center of it all, the capital, a city so magnificent that its memory haunted every subsequent attempt to build earthly paradise. Circular boulevards radiating out from a central temple complex like spokes from a wheel. Canals connecting different districts, their waters flowing according to principles that combined engineering with sacred geometry. Public buildings whose architecture harmonized earth-based materials with celestial alignments, creating structures that were simultaneously functional and devotional. The agricultural areas spread across the continent's central plains like a patchwork quilt of cultivation. But this wasn't the random clearing and planting of primitive farmers. This was systematic landscape management on a continental scale, irrigation networks that channeled water with the precision of modern civil engineering, crop rotation systems that maintained soil fertility across thousands of years of continuous cultivation, terraced hillsides that turned mountainous regions into productive gardens, and connecting it all, a transportation network that makes Roman roads look like footpaths, stone-paved highways that followed topographical contours with mathematical precision, harbor cities positioned to take advantage of ocean currents and prevailing winds, navigation beacons, perhaps the prototypes of all later lighthouse systems that guided ships safely across the thousands of miles of archipelago that surrounded the main continent. To readers in the 1920s, when Churchward's books first appeared, this wasn't just plausible, it was thrilling. The Pacific was still largely unmapped. Deep-sea exploration was in its infancy. Sonar had barely been invented. For all anyone knew, vast plateaus might indeed lie hidden beneath the waves, waiting for some future generation of explorers to rediscover them. The timing couldn't have been better for such theories. Aviation was transforming human perspective on geography, revealing patterns invisible from ground level. Radio was shrinking distances that had once seemed impossible to bridge. If human beings could suddenly fly across oceans and communicate instantaneously around the globe, why couldn't their ancestors have achieved similar connectivity through different means? Churchward fed this appetite for expanded possibility with maps that were simultaneously scientific and imaginative. He showed ocean currents that would have connected different regions of Mu with predictable shipping lanes. He indicated climate zones that would have supported different types of agriculture and settlement. He marked the positions of islands that still existed, Hawaii, Easter Island, Tahiti, as the mountain tops of his drowned continent, proving that the geographical foundation for such a landmass was already visible above the waves. Most convincingly, he embedded Mu within a larger planetary system. This wasn't a continent in isolation, but the hub of a global network. Shipping routes connected Mu's harbors to the earliest settlements of Asia and the Americas. Cultural exchange linked Mu's universities to the temple schools that would later develop into Egyptian and Mesopotamian civilization. Colonial outposts carried Mu's influence to regions that would eventually forget their connection to the motherland, remembering it only in myths of gods who came from across the sea. The destruction, when it came, was correspondingly global in scale. Churchward described not just the sinking of a single continent, but a planetary catastrophe that reshaped oceanic and atmospheric patterns worldwide. Volcanic chains erupting simultaneously across the Pacific Ring of Fire. Tectonic shifts that altered the circulation of deep ocean currents. Ash clouds that blocked sunlight and triggered climate changes that affected every inhabited region of the Earth. The survivors scattered not as random refugees, but as organized expeditions carrying specific missions to preserve different aspects of their homeland's knowledge. Some groups went east to the Americas, bringing agricultural techniques and astronomical observations that would later flower into Maya and Inca civilizations. Others went west to Asia, establishing the philosophical and mathematical traditions that became Hinduism and Buddhism and Taoism. Still others sailed north and south, spreading Polynesian navigation techniques and establishing the ritual centers that archaeologists now find scattered across the Pacific Islands. In Churchward's vision, every subsequent human achievement was essentially an attempt to reconstruct fragments of what had been lost when Mu sank. The pyramids of Egypt were pale copies of Mu's architectural masterpieces. The astronomical observatories of Maya cities were crude rebuildings of Mu's sophisticated star temples. The navigation skills of Polynesian voyagers were degraded remnants of a continental civilization that had once moved people and goods across oceanic distances with routine efficiency. This wasn't just alternative history, it was alternative geography, alternative anthropology, alternative understanding of human potential itself. It suggested that the scattered, competitive, environmentally destructive civilization of the modern world was not the inevitable result of human nature, but a temporary phase of recovery from a much greater loss. Mainstream science dismissed Mu from the start. Continents don't sink, geologically speaking. Continental crust is lighter than oceanic crust, it floats higher. Atlantis-style submersion of an entire landmass is physically impossible according to plate tectonics. But here's the thing, while a Pacific continent didn't exist, Sunderland did. And it did drown gradually as Ice Age glaciers melted and sea levels rose. Sunderland wasn't mythical, it was real. Thousands of square miles of habitable land connecting Indonesia to mainland Asia, now beneath the Java Sea and South China Sea. If advanced societies existed on Sundaland's coasts and lowlands, where humans naturally congregate, where trade routes and fishing grounds are, then rising seas would have drowned their cities, their monuments, their evidence. Only the highest points, places like Gunung Padang built on hilltops, would survive. Could Mu be a garbled memory of Sundaland? Could the legends of a drowned Pacific civilization actually refer to a Southeast Asian maritime culture overwhelmed by post-glacial flooding? The geographic overlap is suggestive. Churchward placed Mu's eastern extent around Indonesia. Gunung Padang sits precisely in that zone. If you overlay his speculative maps with actual bathymetry showing the exposed Sunderland shelf at lower sea levels, the correlation is striking. Other Pacific anomalies add to the puzzle. Nan Madol in Micronesia consists of massive basalt structures built on artificial islands, a Venice of the Pacific, whose construction techniques remain mysterious. Easter Island's Moai statues transported and erected with methods that still spark debate. The Marquesas Islands' stone tiki figures. All across the Pacific, megalithic construction appears on remote islands, suggesting either independent development or diffusion of techniques from a central source. Were these islands once connected by more than just ocean? Were they waypoints in a trade network that spanned the Pacific, possibly originating in the Sunderland region when sea levels were lower and distances between islands were shorter? The legends support this. Many Pacific cultures have flood myths describing ancestral lands that disappeared beneath the waves. The Maori speak of Hawaii, a lost homeland. Hawaiian traditions mention a sunken continent. Aboriginal Australian songlines contain geographical information about coastlines that existed thousands of years ago. These aren't just myths, their encoded memory. And if oral traditions can preserve information about drowned coastlines, why not information about the civilizations that lived on them? Connecting these sites, Gunung Padang, Yonaguni, Göbekli Tepe, the Pacific megalithic cultures, requires accepting several controversial premises. First, that humans during the Ice Age were capable of sophisticated construction, organization, and technology. Not merely survival-focused hunter-gatherers, but societies with surplus resources, specialized labor, and knowledge systems sophisticated enough to create monumental architecture. Second, that information and possibly people traveled across vast distances, creating cultural connections between regions now separated by thousands of miles, whether through land bridges, Sunderland to Asia, Beringia to the Americas, or seafaring capability we don't usually credit to Paleolithic peoples. Third, that rising sea levels drowned the majority of Ice Age civilization, leaving only mountain-top refugees and scattered survivors who carried fragmented memories into later eras. And fourth, perhaps most controversially, that mainstream archaeology has been reluctant to accept this evidence because it threatens foundational narratives about human development, progress, and the origins of civilization. Not necessarily a coordinated conspiracy, but institutional inertia. Paradigms protect themselves. Careers are built on specific frameworks. Acknowledging Ice Age complexity and post-glacial amnesia would require rewriting textbooks, reconsidering countless theories, admitting that previous generations of scholars missed something fundamental. That's a hard pill to swallow. Easier to dismiss the anomalies, explain them away individually, maintain the comfortable story of gradual progress from primitive to advanced. But what if the anomalies aren't outliers? What if they're the pattern, and our current understanding is the outlier, a model that works for the past 5,000 years of recorded history but breaks down when we push deeper into prehistory? The global web of mysteries, Gunung Padang in Indonesia, Yonaguni off Japan, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, Pacific megaliths, underwater anomalies worldwide, suggests something remarkable happened in our past, something that doesn't fit the textbook narrative, something that mainstream archaeology isn't quite ready to acknowledge. But the evidence keeps accumulating. New sites are discovered, old ones are re-examined with better technology, and slowly the picture changes, the timeline stretches, the capabilities of our ancestors expand. And we'll finally accept what should have been obvious. Our ancestors were far more remarkable than we've given them credit for. Let me ask you a question. What if human civilization is cyclical rather than linear? What if we've risen before, achieved remarkable heights, only to fall catastrophically and start again from near zero? This is the theory of cataclysmic reset. And in conspiracy circles, it's become more than theory. It's a lens through which anomalies like Gunung Padang finally make sense. The core idea is simple but profound. Approximately every 12,000 years, Earth experiences planetary-scale catastrophe. Comet impacts, magnetic pole shifts, supervolcanic eruptions, solar micronova events. The specific mechanism varies depending on which researcher you follow, but the result is the same. Civilization ending, destruction. Graham Hancock has been the most prominent popularizer of this theory through his books and Netflix series Ancient Apocalypse. He points to the Younger Dryas event, a sudden return to near-glacial conditions that began around 10,900 BCE and lasted about 1,200 years. This cooling event happened rapidly, within human lifetimes, and was likely triggered by something catastrophic. The evidence? A thin layer of material found worldwide dated to the start of the Younger Dryas, containing exotic elements like nanodiamonds, iridium, and platinum that suggest extraterrestrial impact. Multiple studies have identified this black mat layer across North America, Europe, and elsewhere. Something from space hit Earth hard. The impacts, likely multiple fragments from a disintegrating comet, would have caused immediate devastation. Impact: winters from debris thrown into the atmosphere, massive wildfires consuming forests, tsunamis if the fragments struck ocean, and perhaps most catastrophically, rapid melting of ice sheets causing sea levels to rise and drown coastal civilizations. If advanced societies existed during the Ice Age, concentrated on coastal plains and river valleys as humans naturally are, they would have been obliterated. Their cities drowned, their populations decimated, survivors scattered inland to higher ground, carrying only fragmentary memories of what was lost. Places like Gunung Padang, built on mountaintops, might have served as refuges, intentionally positioned on high ground by people who understood the cyclical nature of catastrophe, who had seen it before or whose oral traditions warned of great floods. This reframes the flood myths found in virtually every culture worldwide. Not metaphor or moral teaching, but memory. The biblical flood, the Epic of Gilgamesh, Deucalion's flood in Greek mythology, Manu's flood in Hindu texts, Aboriginal Australian stories of rising seas, Native American deluge legends, Pacific Islander tales of drowned lands. These aren't independent inventions, they're too similar, too specific. Waters rising, humanity nearly destroyed, a remnant surviving on high ground or boats, the world remade, knowledge lost. If you accept that cataclysm actually happened, the archaeological puzzles resolve. Why does civilization appear suddenly in the archaeological record around 4000 to 3000 BCE? Because it's actually restarting from a collapse. Why do the earliest civilizations, Sumeria, Egypt, appear already sophisticated with writing and mathematics and architecture? Because they're inheriting fragments of knowledge from the previous cycle. Why are there anomalous sites like Göbekli Tepe and Gunung Padang that don't fit the timeline? Because they're survivals from the previous civilization, the one that got reset. But this is where we drift from controversial archaeology into conspiracy theory, because if cyclical cataclysm is real, if this knowledge exists, why isn't it mainstream? Why aren't we teaching it in schools? The conspiracy answer: because accepting it would undermine current power structures. Think about what cyclical collapse implies. It means our current civilization, with all its technological prowess, its nuclear weapons, its global communications, could be destroyed. Not by our own hand necessarily, but by cosmic forces we can't control. Everything we've built, all our progress, could be erased in a generation. That's a terrifying thought. And it's not one governments and institutions want populations dwelling on. Better to maintain the narrative of steady progress, of humanity in control of its destiny. Better to dismiss the evidence of past catastrophes as coincidence or natural disasters within the normal range. The legend of Atlantis seems to echo the same idea. Plato's dialogues describe it: a powerful maritime civilization on an island beyond the Pillars of Hercules at Gibraltar, destroyed in a day and night by earthquake and flood, sinking beneath the sea around 9600 BCE. For centuries, scholars debated whether Atlantis was allegory or history. Most concluded allegory, Plato inventing a cautionary tale about hubris and divine retribution. But notice that date, 9600 BCE, right at the beginning of the Younger Dryas, right when comet impacts would have triggered catastrophic flooding. What if Plato was recording actual history passed down through Egyptian priestly sources of a real civilization destroyed by real catastrophe? Location is debated endlessly: the Mediterranean, the Atlantic, the Caribbean, Antarctica before it was ice-covered. But here's an interesting possibility. What if Atlantis wasn't a single location but a description of a global civilization? The island might be metaphorical, island, in the sense of being separate from the barbaric world around it, not literally a landmass surrounded by water. If Mu's civilization really existed and fell as we discussed, then its greatest legacy wouldn't be found in the ruins of drowned palaces or the artifacts of sunken cities. It would be found in the living traditions of the peoples who claim descent from its survivors, fragmented, transformed by centuries of adaptation to new environments and changing circumstances, but still recognizably connected to their source. The Polynesian navigator still reads the stars as his ancestors did 1,000 years ago, following techniques that were already ancient when the first Europeans reached the Pacific. He memorizes the rising and setting points of dozens of constellations, learns to detect the subtle swells that indicate invisible islands beyond the horizon, develops the ability to sense direction and distance through wave patterns that are imperceptible to untrained observers. This isn't primitive navigation, it's a sophisticated science that rivals GPS systems in accuracy and surpasses them in elegance. The knowledge required to cross thousands of miles of open ocean using only natural signs represents centuries of accumulated observation, experimentation, and refinement. It's the kind of systematic understanding that could only have developed from a tradition of oceanic travel extending back through many generations. Where did such knowledge originate? How did island peoples develop navigation techniques sophisticated enough to enable the colonization of the entire Pacific Basin? The conventional archaeological answer is that these techniques developed gradually as Polynesian populations spread from island to island, each generation pushing a little further into the unknown ocean. But the complexity and systematization of Polynesian navigation suggests influence from a tradition that was already highly developed when the island hopping began. The techniques are too sophisticated, too comprehensive, too precisely calibrated to have emerged from trial and error exploration by small groups of settlers. They seem instead to preserve knowledge that was developed by a civilization with extensive oceanic experience, a people who had been traveling the Pacific for centuries or millennia before the current Polynesian populations inherited their techniques. Other compelling evidence for inherited knowledge lies in the architectural traditions that appear around the Pacific Rim with remarkable consistency. From Easter Island to Cambodia, from Mexico to Indonesia, the same basic structural principles appear again and again: stepped pyramids oriented to astronomical events, stone platforms aligned with seasonal cycles, ceremonial complexes that integrate architectural space with cosmic geography. These aren't just similar building types, they're variations on a consistent architectural philosophy that treats built space as a tool for connecting human consciousness with natural forces. The pyramids function as astronomical observatories, the stone platforms serve as calendars, the ceremonial complexes create acoustic environments that alter human awareness in predictable ways. This integrated approach to architecture, where buildings serve simultaneously as functional spaces, scientific instruments, and consciousness-altering environments, appears in cultures that supposedly developed in complete isolation from each other. Maya temple complexes in Mexico incorporate the same acoustic principles as Hindu temple complexes in Cambodia. Inca ceremonial centers in Peru use the same astronomical alignments as Buddhist monuments in Java. The mathematical relationships underlying these structures show similar consistency. The golden ratio appears in the proportions of monuments separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years. The same harmonic ratios that govern musical intervals appear in the architectural proportions of buildings that had no apparent connection to each other. Modern architects and acoustic engineers studying these ancient structures have discovered principles of design that weren't formally recognized by Western architecture until the 20th century. The builders understood relationships between space, sound, light, and human consciousness that our science is only beginning to explore. How did supposedly isolated civilizations develop such sophisticated understanding of architecture as applied psychology? How did they discover the same mathematical relationships and acoustic principles independently? The consistency suggests that these architectural traditions derive from a common source, a highly advanced civilization that understood the relationship between built environments and human consciousness, and whose survivors carried this knowledge to various parts of the world where it was adapted to local materials and cultural contexts. Even more intriguing are the symbolic systems that appear in cultures around the Pacific, with consistency that challenges conventional theories about independent development. The spiral, the step pattern, the solar disk, the feathered serpent, the world tree. These symbols appear in art and architecture from Polynesia to Peru, with variations that suggest cultural adaptation of common themes rather than coincidental invention. The spiral appears carved into stone in Ireland and New Zealand, painted on pottery in Peru and China, etched into metal in Southeast Asia and North America. In each culture it carries similar meanings: cycles of time, the movement of cosmic forces, the relationship between microcosm and macrocosm. The step pattern, the zigzag or pyramid motif, appears in textiles, architecture, and ceremonial objects from Mexico to Indonesia to Easter Island. It consistently represents ascension, the connection between earth and sky, the progression from material to spiritual realms. The feathered serpent, perhaps most famously represented by Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica, appears in modified forms throughout the Pacific. In Southeast Asia, it becomes the Naga serpent associated with water and wisdom. In Polynesia, it appears as the great eel or sea serpent that connects islands across the ocean. These aren't vague similarities that could be explained by universal human psychology. They're specific symbolic vocabularies that seem to derive from a common source and then diverge through cultural adaptation and geographic separation. Linguistic studies have revealed similar patterns in the vocabularies related to navigation, astronomy, and ceremonial practice. Words for specific navigational techniques, astronomical observations, and ritual procedures show cognate relationships across language families that supposedly developed independently. As the evidence for cultural connections across the Pacific has accumulated, some researchers have proposed a modification of the Mu hypothesis that addresses both the geological impossibilities of Churchward's original theory and the undeniable evidence for ancient cultural connections. Instead of a single continent that sank overnight, this mosaic interpretation suggests that Mu represents the collective memory of multiple advanced civilizations that were disrupted by the geological and climatic changes that accompanied the end of the last ice age. Around 12,000 years ago, as glaciers melted and sea levels rose, vast areas of coastal lowland around the Pacific were submerged. These weren't continents in the geological sense, but they were large enough to support substantial populations and sophisticated cultures. Doggerland in the North Sea, Sunderland in Southeast Asia, the Bering Land Bridge between Asia and North America. All of these regions were drowned as the Ice Age ended. The peoples who lived in these now submerged areas would have been forced to migrate to higher ground, carrying with them whatever they could preserve of their cultural and technological traditions. Over time, the memory of these various displaced civilizations might have merged into a single mythological narrative, the story of a great homeland that was lost to rising seas. This interpretation explains the global distribution of flood myths the consistency of cultural traditions across supposedly isolated regions, the evidence for sophisticated knowledge in ancient civilizations without requiring geological impossibilities or catastrophic overnight destruction. It also suggests that the fragments of advanced knowledge preserved in Pacific cultures might be more historically accurate than previously assumed. All ancient knowledge might be authentic survivals of more comprehensive scientific traditions that were developed by the drowned civilizations of the Ice Age Pacific. Is any of this true? That's the question that keeps people awake at night, scrolling through forums, watching documentaries, debating in comments sections. The evidence is fragmentary, suggestive, but not conclusive. Every piece can be explained away individually. But together, the anomalies form a pattern that's hard to ignore. Radiocarbon dates that don't fit timelines, geophysical evidence of constructed chambers at impossible depths, cement compounds predating known technology, global flood myths too similar to be coincidental, underwater structures that look artificial, megalithic sites that shouldn't exist in the Paleolithic. Either all of this is coincidence, misinterpretation, and wishful thinking, or something remarkable happened in our past that we've forgotten or been prevented from remembering. The conspiracy isn't necessarily a shadowy cabal meeting in smoke-filled rooms. It's subtler than that. It's institutional inertia, paradigms that resist change, funding structures that reward conventional research and punish risky hypotheses, academic careers built on frameworks that can't be questioned without destroying decades of work. It's a distributed conspiracy of incentives and assumptions rather than coordinated suppression. But the effect is similar. Evidence that doesn't fit is dismissed. Researchers who push boundaries are marginalized, and the standard narrative persists regardless of anomalies. Until perhaps the accumulation of evidence reaches a critical mass, until enough people demand answers, until the suppressed becomes undeniable. That's why sites like Gunung Padang matter. They're battlegrounds, testing grounds for whether we're willing to question fundamental assumptions about our past, about whether evidence or orthodoxy will triumph. As 2025 unfolds and renewed investigations at Gunung Padang move forward, we may be approaching such a moment. The technology exists to answer the questions definitively. The public interest is there. The government is willing, at least tentatively. What happens if those chambers are opened and they contain artifacts that prove Ice Age sophistication? What happens if the dating is confirmed beyond doubt? What happens if everything changes? Or what happens if the results are ambiguous, allowing both sides to claim vindication? What if the mystery persists and the battle continues? Either way, the questions won't disappear, the anomalies won't resolve themselves, and the tension between what we're told and what the evidence suggests will keep growing, because at the heart of this isn't really about Gunung Padang or any single site. It's about who we are, where we came from, whether our ancestors were as primitive as we've been taught, or whether they achieved heights we've barely begun to rediscover. It's about whether we're climbing toward an unprecedented future, or whether we're struggling to remember a glorious past that was stolen from us by catastrophe and time. And it's about whether we have the courage to look at uncomfortable evidence and follow it wherever it leads, even if it overturns everything we thought we knew. So where does all this leave us? Here, in 2025, in our complex, interconnected, rapidly changing world, what does an ancient pyramid in Indonesia matter? Why should we care about whether stones were arranged 3,000 or 30,000 years ago? Because how we understand our past shapes how we imagine our future. If human civilization is merely 5,000 years old, if we've progressed linearly from primitive origins to our current technological state, then the future is open-ended. We're climbing towards something unprecedented. First civilization to reach the stars, perhaps. First to transcend biological limitations through technology. We're special, unique. The pinnacle of human achievement is now, and even greater heights await. But if we've risen before and fallen, if our ancestors achieved comparable or even greater sophistication before being reset by catastrophe, then the future looks different. We're not climbing, we're recovering, rediscovering what was known, and we face the same that changes everything. It reframes our relationship with technology, with the environment, with the cosmos. It suggests humility rather than hubris. It warns that our achievements, however impressive, could be erased. Consider the practical implications for our current moment in history. We face climate change, rising seas, shifting weather patterns, ecosystem collapse. The same forces that drowned Sunderland are at play now, just driven by different mechanisms. If Gunung Padang represents a refuge from ancient flooding, what does that teach us about adaptation? About building for survival rather than just convenience? The structure sits at elevation, protected from all but the most catastrophic sea level rise. Was that intentional? Did its builders understand that coastlines are temporary, that high ground is safety? And if so, shouldn't we be considering similar wisdom as we plan our own cities? We're also facing questions about technological development. Are we on the right path? The cement compound from Gunung Padang, a geopolymer that has lasted 20,000 plus years, might be more sustainable than modern concrete, which degrades within decades. Ancient acoustic engineering might offer insights into sound healing, into architecture that enhances rather than degrades human well-being. If we could access the knowledge sealed in those chambers, assuming they exist, assuming they contain anything beyond empty space, would it help us solve current problems? Or would it destabilize systems too invested in current technologies to change? There's also the question of historical equity and post-colonial narratives. For too long, the story of civilization has been centered on Europe and the Near East, Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, Rome. These are the touchstones of advanced culture in mainstream education. Asia, Africa, and the Americas are portrayed as either derivative, learning from the West, or primitive, waiting for Western contact to civilize them. But what if Indonesia was a center of innovation? What if Southeast Asian peoples engineered pyramids when Europeans were living in caves? That reconfigures global history. It empowers regions that have been marginalized in standard narratives. It validates indigenous knowledge systems that colonialism dismissed as superstition. When Culture Minister Fadli Zon calls for renewed studies of Gunung Padang, he's not just pursuing archaeology, he's reclaiming cultural heritage. He's asserting that Indonesian civilization has deep roots, that it contributed fundamentally to human development, that it deserves recognition equal to any Western achievements. This matters in a world still dealing with colonial legacies, with economic imbalances rooted in historical narratives of superiority and inferiority. Rewriting history isn't just academic, it's political, social, transformative. There are also philosophical implications that ripple into how we think about consciousness, knowledge, and human potential. The acoustic properties of Gunung Padang, stones resonating at frequencies that match modern musical tuning, suggest ancient peoples understood something about vibration, about how sound affects matter, and perhaps consciousness. This aligns with traditions worldwide: Tibetan singing bowls, shamanic drumming, church bells, the architectural acoustics of cathedrals and temples. Were these practices based on empirical understanding of physics and psychology? Did ancient builders know that certain frequencies induce meditative states, enhance healing, or facilitate group synchronization? If so, we've lost something valuable. Our modern world is loud, chaotic, full of discordant noise. We treat sound as secondary, as background, but what if sound is fundamental. What if the ancients understood dimensions of reality we've forgotten in our rush toward visual technologies? Rediscovering this wouldn't just be historical curiosity. It could offer therapeutic applications, architectural innovations, maybe even new forms of communication or energy manipulation. And then there's the biggest question of all: are we alone? Not in the cosmic sense of extraterrestrial life, though that's related, but in the temporal sense. Are we the only advanced human civilization? Or are we one iteration in a long series? If we're alone, if this is humanity's first and only attempt at complex society, then our success matters enormously. We can't afford to fail. There's no precedent to learn from, no evidence that recovery is possible. But if we're a cycle in a pattern, if others have risen and fallen before us, then the stakes shift. We're not writing the first chapter, but continuing a story. And that story suggests patterns, that hubris leads to fall, that ignoring cosmic cycles invites catastrophe, that forgetting the past dooms us to repeat it. The ethical considerations are profound. If we excavate Gunung Padang fully, if we break into those sealed chambers, what right do we have? The site is sacred to local Sundanese people. It's been revered for centuries, maybe millennia. Who are we, scientists, tourists, seekers of knowledge, to disturb what might be intentionally sealed? Yet if those chambers contain information that could help humanity survive coming challenges, environmental collapse, resource depletion, social fragmentation, don't we have an obligation to look? Isn't the potential benefit worth the cultural disruption? There's no easy answer. Indigenous sovereignty versus scientific inquiry, preservation versus exploration, respect for the past versus hope for the future. These tensions play out at Gunung Padang as they do at sacred sites worldwide. What's clear is that the site matters beyond its stones and dates. It's become a symbol. For alternative researchers, it represents suppressed truth struggling toward light. For mainstream archaeologists, it's a cautionary tale about methodology and extraordinary claims. For Indonesian citizens, it's national heritage and pride. For indigenous Sundanese, it's living spirituality. For conspiracy theorists, it's evidence of cycles and resets. All of these meanings coexist, sometimes harmoniously, often in tension. And as investigations resume in 2025, as new data emerges, the meanings will evolve further. Perhaps the greatest lesson of Gunung Padang is this: the past isn't settled. It's not a closed book with final answers. It's contested territory, constantly being reinterpreted, always offering new surprises. Every generation looks at ancient sites through different lenses, asks different questions, applies different technologies. What seemed impossible to investigators in 1914 becomes provable in 2025. What we consider fringe speculation today might be mainstream consensus tomorrow. History isn't what happened. History is what we think happened, based on available evidence and current frameworks, and both evidence and frameworks change. So as we drift towards sleep, contemplating stones that might be 28,000 years old, vibrating at frequencies that might unlock forgotten knowledge, sealed in chambers that might contain anything or nothing, we're really contemplating ourselves, our assumptions, our limitations, our potential. Because if our ancestors could achieve what Gunung Padang suggests, then we're capable of more than we imagine. And if they failed, if their civilization fell despite their achievements, then we face similar fragility. The mountain holds both hope and warning, both pride in human capability and humility before forces larger than ourselves. As the Indonesian government moves forward with renewed investigations, as Dr. Hillman and others prepare for potential vindication or defeat, as the world watches with mixture of skepticism and fascination, we're all participating in something profound. We're deciding what kind of story We want to tell about ourselves, whether we're children of progress or heirs to catastrophe, whether our ancestors were primitive or powerful, whether the future is unprecedented or cyclical. The stones can't answer these questions alone. They're just stones, after all, arranged by long dead hands for purposes we can only infer. The meaning we make is our contribution, our interpretation, our hope or fear projected onto ancient mysteries. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the reason sites like Gunung Padang captivate us isn't what they definitively prove, but what they allow us to imagine. The spaces they open in our minds, the questions they raise that don't have easy answers. In our modern world of certainty and data, of algorithms and predictions, there's something deeply appealing about genuine mystery, about not knowing, about standing at the edge of knowledge and peering into darkness that might contain wonders. Gunung Padang offers that. And as we continue to investigate, to debate, to wonder, we're engaging in something fundamentally human, the quest to understand where we came from, which shapes where we might go. And so, dear listener, we've reached the end of our journey, or perhaps not the end, but a resting place, a pause before the next chapter unfolds. We've walked the terraces of Gunung Padang, felt the vibration of ancient stones, contemplated chambers hidden beneath our feet. We've expanded our view to encompass a global web of mysteries, Yonaguni's underwater terraces, Göbekli Tepe's impossible age, the legends of drowned continents. We've considered conspiracies and cataclysms, resets and cycles, the possibility that our civilization is not humanity's first attempt at greatness. And we've reflected on what all this means for us now, in our precarious moment of history, facing our own environmental challenges, technological dilemmas, and questions about human potential and limitation. The journey has taken us from shock to wonder, from frustration to hope, from certainty to mystery. And now, as your eyes grow heavy and your thoughts drift, as the boundary between waking and dreaming grows thin, you carry these questions with you into sleep. What's really buried beneath Gunung Padang? Will we live to see those chambers opened? Will the artifacts prove ancient sophistication beyond our current understanding? Or will the mystery persist forever tantalizingly out of reach? What happened 12,000 years ago? Was there truly a global catastrophe that reset human civilization? Do we face similar danger in our future? Should we be learning from the past rather than dismissing it? Who were our ancestors really? Primitive survivors barely clinging to existence? Or sophisticated engineers and astronomers whose achievements we've yet to fully recognize? And what does it mean that powerful institutions resist these questions? Is it simple scientific conservatism, or something more troubling? A suppression of knowledge that might liberate us from current systems of control? These questions don't have answers yet. Perhaps they never will, at least not definitive ones that satisfy everyone. But that's okay. The questions themselves are valuable. They keep us curious. They prevent us from settling into comfortable certainty. They remind us that the universe is stranger and more magnificent than any story we can tell about it. As 2025 progresses, as the promised investigations at Gunung Padang move forward, we'll be watching. New data will emerge, new debates will rage, the story will continue, and you, dear listener, are part of it now. You've engaged with these mysteries, you've considered possibilities, you've allowed yourself to wonder, to question, to imagine alternatives to official narratives. That's important. That's how change happens, not through institutional decree, but through individuals deciding that the questions matter, that the search for truth is worth pursuing, even when it's uncomfortable or controversial. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Maybe keeping the questions alive, refusing to accept simplistic answers, maintaining openness to possibilities beyond current paradigms. Maybe that's how we honor our ancestors and prepare for our future. Before I let you go completely, a gentle invitation. If these mysteries speak to you, if you found value in this exploration, consider joining our community. Subscribe to Goodnight History, turn on notifications so you catch each new investigation as we release it. Share this with friends who might appreciate these deep dives into the unknown. Knowing you're out there, all across the globe, pondering these same questions, it creates a kind of connection, a distributed investigation spanning time zones and continents. We're all seekers together, following threads of mystery wherever they lead.